Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
My father tells me that he's sitting in jail, military prison, and his thought was, this is stupid. So he never got in another fight. Do you have the book? No, Randy has the books, doesn't he? I know I have a couple of the books that my father was mentioned in, Experience in the Aleutian Isles. He had lots of medals and stuff that he didn't talk about. My mother asked for a list when he died. My mother asked for a list of all the medals he had won, and he didn't even have all of them, and he didn't mention all of them because he just didn't talk a lot. He didn't talk to her a lot about his experiences in the war. For some reason, he talked to me about them. I don't know why, but then he talked to me about a lot of crazy stuff that he didn't talk to her about, so, like abortion. Anyway, but yeah, his childhood growing up was really, really hard. And all the boys worked at the mine in some capacity. He dropped out of school in 10th grade to work at the mine, which always bothered him, that he had to drop out of school. He always worked really hard. I suspect somebody, probably, the first sergeant he encountered, pushed him and called him ignorant, called him an ignorant hillbilly and all that stuff, because he had a real hard time with those terms. Those were the first terms he pulled out when he called somebody else names, like a racist or a Wallace supporter or whatever. He'd get drunk and call my mother a hillbilly and a ridge runner. I suspect those were terms that the first time he heard them, they were applied to him when he was in the military, because that's what they do. It's just what they do. They have to make you into somebody who can work with a unit, so they don't want a lot of individual strong wills running around and going AWOL all over the place. Not AWOL is not the term I want. Thinking like individuals, they need to think like a unit. So, but anyway, I always thought he worked in the mine, but according to my mother, he drove the wagons. He drove wagons for them. He didn't actually work in the mine. He had brothers who did. They were older than he was, but he apparently was a wagon driver when first started working there. And he also said that he, when the union came around, he was one of the first to sign up because he had nothing to lose. And those were the days when signing up for the union could get you killed. It was really bad because they had the Pinkerton Agency and all those guys who were basically thugs. There was a TV show on for a while glorifying the Pinkertons, like they were just this detective agency. But no, they were thugs that basically went around trying to suppress unionization and finding reasons to kill the people who were trying to start unions or were members of unions. There were some pretty notorious incidents. That's what Mother Jones built her whole reputation on, is all these young men who've been killed for unionizing. That's, yeah. Anyway, kind of breaks my heart when I read about all these mine prisons in other countries. What's going on here with, getting rid of the unions and how unsafe it is, and, we're going to bring back clean coal and all that shit. Yeah, okay, we're preying on a nation that doesn't have the benefit of listening to my father talk about all that stuff. And people who think that there's such a thing as clean coal have no concept of how dangerous working in mine is and how brutal it is on the people who work there. I guess now they let women work. I don't know. But my father had some I think as a result of his upbringing, that's another thing too. He talked about when he was a kid, he was sick, and the mine owner's wife drove in her big fancy car to pick him up and take him to the doctor, but she refused to let him sit in the front seat because he was a miner's kid. Therefore, he was filthy and disgusting, and he was vermin as far as the mine owners were concerned. The people who made them rich, they looked down on, which is one reason I have a hard time with people like that. Donald Trump, etc., Koch brothers, etc. But she made him sit in the back seat. And then when he came back from World War II, a big hero, and he was a big hero. He was a big hero. He really was. And he was not somebody who shot off his mouth about it a lot. He didn't, talk about, he never talked to me about, I did this awesome thing and I did that awesome thing and he never talked like that. The war was trauma for him. So he didn't talk, he talked to me about the trauma of war. He didn't talk to me about what a hero he was. He never talked about his medals. He never bragged about all of that stuff. So when he came back from the war and he came back a hero, the same mine owner who made him sit in the back seat of her fancy car because he was, a coal miner's brat, wanted to throw a big party for him because he was a hero and he told her to go to hell. I don't think he used that language because at the time he was more polite than that. But he just basically told her no. I remember how you treated me when I was a kid. And there's no way I'm letting you capitalize on what happened to me during the war, which for him was not a big, yay, look at me thing. It was necessary. It was a necessary evil. It was a necessary evil. So he was not going to let her, get. Anyway, some of the other things he talked about, one thing he talked about as a kid was, they used to, apparently when somehow they got a hold of a jalopy, he and his friends, and he talked about siphoning gas, stealing gas from other people, siphoning gas and, to fill their jalopy with so they could go joyriding in their jalopy. Horses are awesome, but because they go fast, but cars are even more awesome. So I don't know how fast you could go in a car back then, but apparently you could go fast enough. And but he talked about siphoning gasoline. He got into all kinds of trouble. He was like his dad. He was wild, especially since he didn't have a dad. But he talked about siphoning gasoline at one point and accidentally ingesting a little bit and getting really, really sick. He once told me, and he was always saying things to me that I realized later he was quoting somebody else. I thought he was being brilliant, and he was saying these things to me. Just really interesting. My father's so clever, he came up with that phrase. No, he didn't. He's quoting somebody else. But he was like in his 60s, late 50s, early 60s, and he said to me once, all the crazy things he'd done when he was younger, and of course he'd been a heavy drinker. He never touched tobacco until he was 28. That's when he started smoking. And then he was so addicted that he could never quit, and it always bothered him immensely that he couldn't quit because he was so disciplined about everything else. When he finally quit drinking, he just stopped drinking. And in 75, when he and my mother moved to Augusta, he just stopped drinking, and he always kept his weight. He was very disciplined about his weight and exercise. And when I was 13 years old or so, he decided to teach himself golf because all of his friends, who he was actually better educated than most of them because he was self-educated. He read everything he could get his hands on. We had books on law and math and I don't know what all at home, and he read all of them. He was always reading. When he wasn't drunk or hanging out with his buddies, he was reading, and he just read everything he could get his hands on. He was interested in everything. He really should have been able to go to college, and he could have gone to some place like, I can't even remember the name of it now, Military Institute, Annapolis Military Institute. Anyway, he could have gone someplace like that. If he'd had a scholarship, he couldn't have afforded to go, but if, somebody had backed him, he certainly had the mind to do it and be top of his class, because he was like a sponge. Even with all the drinking and smoking he did, he was so freaking smart. Really intelligent man. Anyway, I got off track on all, I do that. I wander around, especially in the morning when I'm not as focused. But, where was I? Let's see, I was talking about, he taught himself to play golf. And he got, at that time, that's Super 8, the movie Super 8. That's about the time the Super 8 cameras came out, and people could own these. Other people, like Richard's dad, Ertel, had like regular movie cameras and stuff to take pictures of the kids and stuff. My dad only, to my knowledge, bought the first kind of camera he bought like that was Super 8, and he got one of those, and to record himself so he could watch his golf swing. And he was so disciplined just watching him. And I became the same way about basketball, just probably from his example, watching him. Because I became a basketball fanatic. But he was so disciplined about how he approached the game of golf, recording himself with a Super 8 camera to watch his swing. He practiced putting for hours every day, and he had the time to do it because he was retired and he couldn't keep a job. Get into that in a minute. But he did and going to driving ranges to hit long, learn to hit with a driver. And he did all of this before he ever set foot on a golf course. So that when he started playing with his buddies, he was a better golfer than they were because of all the work he'd put into it, perfecting all the elements of everything. And again, he took it apart, he read about it, he studied it, he read magazines, he read books on it. This is how he approached things. He was so disciplined and intelligent about everything. He was always working on TV, studying the TV, and sending me to the store for tubes. Of course, everybody's dad did that, but my dad actually knew what he was doing because he worked at understanding it. Anytime he was putting something together, you get these things like a bicycle or whatever, he would read all of the instructions first. My mother wouldn't do that. If something didn't fit, she'd just try to force it, and most people don't bother with that stuff. But he read the instructions, he read the manuals. Anytime he wanted to learn about anything, he would get everything he could find on the subject and study as much as he could about it. And this is the example I grew up with. That's how I approached Mormonism. That's how I approached Mormonism. I read the Book of Mormon. Then I read all the other books. Then I grabbed everything I could find on theology and Mormon history and biographies of the prophets and everything else, which bothered your father. I think he was afraid that he didn't feel like putting that kind of effort in. He'd go to work during the day, he'd come home exhausted, and he didn't want to read, he didn't want to think about stuff like that. And he didn't want to talk, he just wanted to sit down and vegetate in front of the TV, which I understand. Now I understand it. At the time I didn't understand it. Now I understand it. But especially since they treated him so poorly at work, that it was hard, sometimes very hard for him. I think, they liked him in Baton Rouge, they liked him in Wyoming, in Houston, they were not so good to him. But anyway, that's how I approached the Mormon Church, which was why I ended up losing my faith, is because I approached it exactly the way my father would. I read everything I could get my hands on, with the net result that I was also taught to think for myself, so you end up with a lot of questions. And when you end up with that many questions and people can't answer them, it's hard to keep your faith. So, all of that being said, I don't know at what point my father became like that, whether he was always that way. I doubt it. I think in the Army he became that way. But the other thing I was going to talk about, him not being able to hold down a job, it turns out he had narcolepsy, which I didn't realize. My mother told me that I knew he passed out at work. I knew he had blackout, and he'd have a blackout and they'd fire him. So he worked for the post office. He worked for White Castle hamburgers. He always made the best hamburgers in the world. That man knew how to make a hamburger because, again, that's how he approached things. He worked for, I can't even remember all the places he worked for, but he tried really hard to hold down jobs. And he would black out and they'd fire him or he'd quit or something. I don't know. And eventually he gave up. He just gave up trying to hold down the job. And my mother was our main source of income. According to my mother, my father pretty much drank his retirement checks. So that really wasn't, there was an issue when my second year of college, she made the mistake of, in filling out the paperwork for me to go to college, she included my father's income. And then I didn't get my Pell Grant stuff. I didn't get my loan. And I remember her being really upset about that because his income really wasn't available to us. And until 1975 when he stopped drinking. But fly fishing. He went through a period of fly fishing too. I think that's before he took up golf. And he was, again, studied everything he could get his hands on. Would stand in the backyard practicing with a fly rod because fly fishing is a very intelligent sport. It's not like just sitting on the side of the river with a cane pole and a line hanging from it and a worm on a hook. It's a very intellectual thing, and he was always attracted to things like that. It's just a shame because, and apparently he tried to re-enlist a couple of times. That's another thing Mama told me.
Oh, that's interesting. I'd never heard that before.
He tried to re-enlist a couple of times, and they wouldn't let him. They sent him very nice letters saying, thank you for your service. You served us well. You've done your duty for your country. Thank you very much, but you need to, enjoy your retirement, basically, is what they told him.
He was literally brain damaged, so that makes sense.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, and this is funny to me because, again, he told my mother one thing and he told me the truth. I don't know why. I don't know why it happened this way. It's just so bizarre. But anyway.
How bizarre. Sorry.
How bizarre, yes. No, that's fine. Because that's where you get it from. You get it from me. I do that too. Anyway, and I can't tell you how many times I've almost referred to lines in O'Keefe with things I've said this morning. Things like, where were we? Anyway. But he got his brain injury. He was in one of those troop transport trucks that you see in the movies all the time. He was in the back, and they hit a rock, and he was, I think whatever they did, they can't have hit a rock and then he hit his head on a rock. It can't be that way. I'm mixing some things up. But he was in the back of a troop transport truck, and he was bounced out of the back of the truck and bashed his head on a rock. That's how he got his brain injury. And he actually had brain surgery. he told my mother he was shot in the head. So when my mother and I were talking about this after my father died, and she said, he told me he got shot in the head. I said, that's hilarious, because he told me this happened. And, that he got bounced out of the truck. And she went and looked through his records after that, or asked for his official records, and it turned out he told me the truth. He told her a big old lie. I guess he thought she wouldn't respect him if he told her that he got, hit his head on a rock.
Shut up! Copyright 2017 Red Anvil Amalgamated LLC. For more of this and other worlds, visit redanvilcreative.com.
To fight the forces of evil!